with our technical difficulties. I am here with River and with Cass. My name is Brooks, and I use he, him pronouns, and I'm kind of one of the MCs for the day today. I also use they, them pronouns. And I wanted to introduce Cass and River from TransPonder, and they are going to provide information on the trans experience in FAIR and what we can all do to be better and active allies to trans and gender diverse folks during FAIR. And I love that this is so FAIR specific. TransPonder is a small grassroots, completely transgender founded and led nonprofit based in Eugene, Oregon, providing support, resources, and education for and about the trans and gender diverse community and its allies. And I must say they do incredible work. We are really grateful that they're here with us today. So thank you, River and Cass, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Brooks. As Brooks said, we're here to talk about what's it like to be at FAIR, and then more importantly, how to be trans at FAIR, and then how to be a good ally to those trans folks, kind of as we reveal maybe some situations that you may not have thought about otherwise. But first, let me give a couple of notes. As Brooks said, my name is Cass Averill. I use he, him pronouns. I am the board president and co-founder of TransPonder. I've been doing this work for a long time. I also do DEI work out in the corporate sector as well. So I love talking about this stuff, and I'm excited to really make it FAIR specific this year because I don't ever get to do this. So this is a first. I'm really excited to talk to you all about it. And just me personally, I've been going to FAIR either as an attendee or as FAIR family working it for somewhere probably close to a decade now. I'm not working it that whole time, but that means for me, I attended FAIR pre-transition and post-acknowledgement of my trans identity and post-medical transition for me. So I definitely have some stories of my own of how some areas of FAIR have been a little bit scritchy or hard for me to navigate since it wasn't created with folks like me in mind. And then I'll just hand it off to River to do their introduction.
Hi, everybody. I'm River. I use they, them pronouns. I am on the board of TransPonder, and I'm also the resource navigator for TransPonder. So helping our community get help, get connected to the supports that do exist. And I have been going to FAIR for about 16 years, part of FAIR. I started in the community village, creating art with our FAIR folks, and then became part of the coordinating council for community village. And now I am helping create the Rainbow Connection, holding down that sanctuary in space. And we were just talking about that. So I love how these conversations are flowing together. I also have attended FAIR before I transitioned and after, during. And so I can talk about the differences and the different experiences that I've had. And I'm really excited. In the other part of my world, I do behavioral health. And so one of my passions is helping different communities figure out what this looks like in their context and how to really bring people in and support folks in that context. So this just feels like a delightful more of that in FAIR, and I love FAIR. So this just feels really juicy and exciting that I get to be part of this here.
Yeah, absolutely. And as with any conversation, I think we should probably state a couple of disclaimers. One of which is that River and I do not speak for or represent all transgender or gender diverse folks. We are just speaking from our own personal experiences, and then have also, as representatives of TransPonder, collected stories and information from other trans and gender diverse community members here. So we will be, without of course their personal information, but retelling kind of the situations that might occur to help make this information more applicable so that we can understand it. And, we have to acknowledge that there are a number of privileges that River and I have that lots of trans and gender diverse folks don't, whether we're talking about, racial, privileges or socioeconomic privileges, or really almost any other privileges. All these things come at play. And though we may have experienced some of them, we certainly haven't experienced all of them. And we do our best to, present the information in an as inclusive manner as possible. So we just wanted to state that, and that this is a safe place to be able to ask questions if you aren't quite getting what it is we're saying. River and I are opting in to be your educators a little bit today. So feel free to type your questions in chat, and we would love to make sure that this information is applicable to you and is being received well.
also meant to be very interactive. So, we're going to talk a little bit, and then there's going to be the majority of this is going to be us in communication and conversation. So it is not just Cass and I talking at you the whole time.
Nope. And just a quick note on kind of like, what is this conversation versus what is this not? Basically, this is not a complete conversation. We're just going to give you some examples of what has been experienced at FAIR and some ideas about how to be a good ally when those sorts of situations happen. Really, this is just kind of like the start of this conversation to get you started. But really, there's so much more than what we will be able to cover in this short conversation with you today. But speaking of, River, I think a good place to start is maybe a few terms just to make sure that we're all on the same page when we say these things, that we know what we're talking about. So I'll start. The first term I just kind of want to cover is transgender. So what we mean when we say transgender is that the person does not identify with the sex they were assigned at birth. So I'll make it personal. Me, I was assigned female at birth. I do not identify with that gender identity. So I actually identify as male. I consider myself a transgender male. So that is one way. Remember, it just means you do not identify with the sex you were assigned at birth. Cisgender, on the other hand, is kind of like the opposite end. It means you do identify with the sex you were assigned at birth, which is the far majority of people that get talked about in our society right now, right? So most folks would classify themselves in that cisgender category because when they popped out and the doctor said, it's a boy or it's a girl, they grew up identifying that way and that felt great and fine to them. But River, I'm curious if you will identify what non-binary means.
So I think a lot of folks will think about non-binary, and first what pops into their head is binary, so male or female. And then there's a really understandable assumption that maybe non-binary means like both or somewhere between on this line. And I think for the majority of us who are non-binary, it really is not. It is much more, a universe of options. So we come off of that line and come into something more 3D and, or a prism. And so it is really about a whole third category of thinking about gender with expansive possibilities.
Yep. We can have many like galaxies within the universe, right? And so what we're kind of saying is each kind of identity is kind of its own galaxy because there's all these different details. Yes, there's male, yes, there's female, but those aren't the only two options. It's a bigger picture, right? There are also non-binary and genderqueer and gender fluid and a whole long list of other gender identities that would take too long to mention and many more that are yet to be created. This is a conversation that is constantly changing. And it's a wonderful thing because it's giving us language to things that we haven't had language to before. So hopefully that just kind of explains a little bit when we're talking about gender identity or gender, when we say that in short, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about transgender, cisgender, and non-binary sort of categorizations of gender.
And I would say with any of the identities, it's really, about saying, it's an invitation to be curious and get to know that individual person. There's no label that's going to give you all the information about how somebody feels and expresses and identifies. So the more that we think about gender as curiosity, I think the better.
Yeah, I think actually that's a great segue into start talking about some of these situations that have happened within the FAIR context, right? So, I think River, when we started this conversation, I think you had a really great one to start with that I think everyone can identify with at FAIR, not just trans and gender diverse folks.
Okay, y'all, so we're going to talk about the bathrooms because anybody who goes to FAIR, this is the part of FAIR where everybody, I don't care your gender identity or what costume you are wearing, there is a moment where you're like, I have to go to the bathroom. And, that involves these lines and the heat and bugs and smells and discomfort. And so if you are not cis and you are in that line, there are extra moments and experiences that we have. And it's really important for both folks who maybe only come to FAIR as the public, as well as FAIR family to think about. We recently, in the last few years, turned the urinals away from being labeled in the binary, here's where you go if you're a woman and here's where you go if you're a man, to talking, they're labeled by how you pee. Do you need to squat or do you need to stand? And frankly, let's just be real, regardless of your gender identity, if you have like layers of skirt on, you might need to squat. You might actually like hoist that stuff up and squat down. So we're really trying to move it away from, you know, these kind of binary gender identities. That said, there's some sketchy moments that happen. And I've been there for them personally, and I've heard about them. So, you know, there's just, I don't know why, but people have a very deep need to help people find the bathroom that they think they belong in. And that can happen really explicitly by saying, hey, I think you belong over there. It can also happen with these kind of looks that keep happening, or uncomfortable energy, or kind of like moving in the way of people. So if you are a person who needs to pee in that hot, sticky, lovely, magical environment, this is not helpful, right? Because now it's your turn to go pee, and you have even gone through this whole pre-experience of like, can I deal with it? How bad do I need to pee? Can I wait? Can I get back to my camp? Right? All of these things. So if you know, Cass and I, we were chatting about like, okay, so what could be helpful? There's first just knowing that that's happening, right? This is happening. And there's a privilege that you're holding if it's not happening when you go to the bathroom. The other is, you know, okay, let's talk about if you're public. So what if you're seeing this? What if you see this happening? You're in line with somebody fabulous, and they clearly need to go to the bathroom, and you're starting to see some of this behavior of, you know, helping people find the right bathroom. What do you do? We have ideas, absolutely, but first let's just start with your ideas.
Yeah, feel free to unmute or just type your idea in the chat. Either way is great.
Yeah. Like, I would maybe, I kind of go for the bitch black mode, so I would probably just be like, don't fucking tell anyone else how they need to go to the bathroom. What are you, in kindergarten? Or I don't know, but that's the most diplomatic.
I go for the all-knowing white guy thing, which is, I think they know where they're going. Like, right? They don't seem lost to me, or some kind of comment like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking maybe some kind of deflection from their attention on the person they're getting into, like turning them towards me, like, hey, did you have a question about something? Is there something I can help you with?
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, those are actually all really great ideas. And one of the things that I love about these conversations is that it becomes very clear very quickly that there is no one right answer, right? Like, we all have to sit inside ourselves and figure out, like, where do I feel my sense of ability to step forward and advocate today? And some days it may be very forward and in your face, and other days it may be more silent or on the back end help, so that it's not as visual or obvious, right? And all of those are valid. All of those are actually really important ways. And so being able to check in with yourself and be like, what can I do today? What feels good to me? Because you also need to keep yourself safe, right? As well, in your emotional being. So I think all of those are really great. I know for myself, you know, standing in that line, having somebody do kind of what y'all are just saying, of just kind of like interject and advocate, and be like, hey, actually, before I could even respond, right? You know, and be like, you know what, they're right where they need to be, right? Everyone's, you know, invited here, right? And then, you know, and there's ways that we can say the same thing in all, like just short phrases in all sorts of ways. But I think that's really an important way that we can advocate. And that applies to anyone, whether you are public or fair family, you know what I mean? You can do that. Another thing that kind of goes, I think, hand in hand with that idea is be the buddy. Like, I know for me, sometimes when I'm in all my fantastic fair regalia, it is nerve-wracking because I have to figure out how to like navigate my own costume to go to the bathroom. But then on top of that, I'm trans. And so now I have to navigate, I have to decide single stall or multi-stall, right? And then if in that case, what's my safety? What sort of support do I need? Do I feel like I can handle this on my own? And sometimes just having somebody be, whether I'm in a private stall or not, right? Just having somebody be like, hey, do you want somebody to go with you? I'll just hang out. You know what I mean? And make sure that all is fine. And if you need help with your costume coming out of the bathroom, or, you know, like whatever, I'm there for you. And that, I mean, that's a thing that a lot of us would do anyway. But when you're doing it for a trans or gender diverse person, you know, it can mean exponentially more, because there's more obstacles for us to navigate when it comes to bathroom usage than the standard cis person.
Absolutely. And I would add to that. So when Cass and I were chatting about this beforehand, we were thinking about this from multiple angles. So I noticed we have a lot of fair family on this. And so I just want to say, if you're fair family, I will be contacting our lovely bathroom crews, how I have in the past, but I have this idea of, bathroom fairies, somebody who's there, who's like in that fair family vibe, who can very, kind of lightly say like, okay, hey, everybody, if you stand over here, if you squat over here, and, and until we get that to happen, anybody on this call and anybody listening to this, you can be that fairy. I actually saw that one year. I was with a friend. There was, anxiety about what was going on. It wasn't super clear if people were being great about this or not. And, I was there with as the buddy, and I also saw this beautiful human noticing it. And they just sort of in a very fun and beautiful way said, oh, hi, here we all are at the urinals. Isn't it great we're not standing in that line, the people who have to poop and like sit there. So then they, started directing in this really fun way. And with a lot of humor. And that doesn't, you don't have to have that as your job at fair. That can just be a really fun way to be an ally. And it means the world, because we all know what happens when you don't pee, right? And that would be a very unfun addition to your fair experience.
I think that's a safe thing to say for most folks, I think. But yeah, so these are great ideas. And I like that because, I think about any time that I'm walking past the 6-pack going into the village, or I'm over by the main stage bathrooms, or, I'm over in the 8 somewhere. There's all these pass-through bathroom opportunities in which I think we could be a little bit extra support if you have like the extra flair in you in that moment to just, as you're walking through, be a little bit of that, like bring that circus announcer out and, let people know what's what. I think that's great because in a way, what you're doing is you're helping those who have those questions, who haven't said it out their mouth yet, get the answer without having to awkwardly ask someone who it might be actually really hard for them to answer. Because of course you can't always tell if someone's trans on the outside, right? So, it's good to find ways to provide this information in a holistic way, right? For everyone without ever doing the thing where the person who's getting the information feels like the finger's being pointed and wagged at them, like they've done wrong, right? There are situations where that's true and that's valid and real, but I think in general, assuming best of intent can get us a lot further in the conversation than immediately jumping on someone and assuming they did it with a malicious intent. And so some of these strategies that we're giving today are just helping kind of provide that information in a proactive way so that hopefully we can build this culture up where we're meeting each other where we're at, we're acknowledging that we're all humans and that we're learning and growing together. Obviously, we can't know everything in our own individual experiences. We actually have to relate with other humans, right? And trans folks are just another classification of human that you have an opportunity to interact with and grow. And in the FAIR context, I think this is a really special place to do it because of the culture that FAIR has cultivated over the last 50 plus years now of trying to make this a place where you can bring yourself, your whole self, your most fantastic self in its full fruition to the forefront and let your flag fly, right? No matter your identity, no matter your orientation, no matter any of it, FAIR is always supposed to have been the place where this is true. And I think over the last few years, what we're seeing is it is really moving in that direction now, even for the folks that weren't originally involved in the conversation. Now we're starting to be included, and this is exciting. So, since we're talking about fair culture, let's just bring up another one of those scenarios that comes up. And this is one that has not happened to me because I'm usually one that's in the full fantastic fair regalia. But this happened to some of our community members. And it is a thing. So at fair, taking pictures with people that you don't know is very, very common. Right? This is part of, it's actually kind of the wonderful things about fair culture is we get to take these pictures and be fantastic with each other. But what we're finding is that in some cases, some of our community are reporting that they're one, not dressed up. And two, we're having a bunch of people come up and ask to take pictures with them. And when they're in the moment, and there's no personal connection, these are strangers, right? So in the moment, they don't really understand what's going on. And so it just sort of happens. And then they go on about their way. And then it starts to dawn on that trans individual what actually just happened. It was discovered that they were trans because of conversation. One person was wearing a t-shirt that says, "This is what trans looks like." And so in that way, they were visual. But basically their trans status comes up somehow. And then all of a sudden the public wants to take a picture with the trans person. That's not okay. Let's just be clear. That's not okay. You can have a picture with a trans person. That's not the problem. But taking a picture of a person because of their identity, not because of how they're dressed, not because of how they're showing up, right? In this fair, culture, but simply because of their identity, that's not okay. They're not a fetishization. They're not a thing to put on a shelf and say, "Hey, see all these people that I've related with?" It becomes feeling kind of dirty and gross at that point, because then you realize as the trans individual that that wasn't about me, right? This was about one piece of me and not the whole of me. And it just feels kind of scritchy and weird. So I'm curious, I'll just toss it out. I know I have ideas too on how one might provide support for a trans individual through this, because you're not always going to know it when you see it happening, right? But I'm curious if any of y'all would have a sense of how you might respond if you were to see something like that happen.
I have to just say, I really don't know how I would respond, because yesterday when actually OBO mentioned it in another workshop, I ignorantly had not thought that was a thing. That's like some Sarah Bartman on display type of shit. Like So I don't know how I would respond besides maybe swearing or hugging the respective parties.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that, because I just think it's important to acknowledge that not everybody supports in a really bold way. There's a lot of us who are a little more quiet, a little more shy, myself included, actually. And so it is really powerful. I think there's a moment that a lot of folks can have where they've seen something, they didn't boldly intervene, and then they think the moment's gone. Like, now this moment to be helpful and an ally is now gone because they didn't do the bold intervention. And I really want to call in how important it is to connect with that person who just went through it, and be there and be loving and say, "Hey, I saw that sucked. Are you okay? How are you feeling?" And it might just be sitting with them. It might be, let's go get an ice cream, like bring them, a treat that they love if you happen to know them well enough. Maybe they're fine, but I just think that there's a really powerful allyship in witnessing something that's happened, naming that you saw it, and checking in with that person and giving them some love. Putting some points in their resiliency bucket is huge.
Huge. And actually, that is one of the stories that I got that told me that, like, this is a real thing. This happened, right? And I asked that person what happened after, like, how did they recover? Because the other thing in this person's story is they were working a booth. They were working the Rainbow Village booth, as a matter of fact. So that was another, like, how they were kind of got found out in their trans status, is working at the queer booth, right? So somebody observed this happening, and what they did is they ran away before they even checked in with the person, because they knew they were working and they would still be there. Ran away and got that person a drink and a snack, and came back and said, "You know what? I saw that. I can only imagine that was awkward and weird, and I know you're working. So I just wanted to bring you a little bit of love that way while you're on because they still had to finish their shift, right? So gave them a little bit of extra love, dropped some coins in that resiliency bucket so they could get through the rest of their shift, feeling love as well, not only feeling violated, right? And so trying to find a way to show up, do that silent sometimes support of being like, that sucked. I have a couple bucks in my pocket. You know what I mean? I'm just going to go get this person who's obviously usually at fair, right? Really hot and be able to get them something that will help their situation, even if it's just in a really small way. That show of, hey, I acknowledge, I saw and acknowledge what just happened is huge, because most of the time in trans people's experiences, nobody says a darn thing because they don't know what to say. And it's not always about saying words. Sometimes it's just about showing up. So showing up is another interesting one that I think is a great segue into our next one. And I'm just going to toss it out there, River. I'm going to let you do the talking on this one, but talk to me about the Moon Lodge and being a trans individual.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been going to fair before I was, coming out. And so I was there as a female presenting person, female identifying person. And so I went into the Moon Lodge. which I loved. I just want to say, like, it was the sweetest, most welcoming and relaxing and relieving experience. I was nursing my child. And I got to go into this space where I could, you know, just be hanging out and nursing and get a tarot reading and essential oils and love. And, you know, we just had a conversation right before this about sanctuary for folks who are on the LGBTQIA spectrum. So, I mean, we are creating this for a much wider gender identity. But before that existed, I was in the Moon Lodge, and you know, it was interesting because there's been a lot of questions about, you know, who belongs in that space, you know, where's the cutoff line, you know, all of these sorts of things. And I think about, if I was to go to fair now and be chest feeding, would I go to the Moon Lodge? You know, would I have a safe space to do that? Would I have to do the mental trigonometry of, you know, my baby's screaming and they're crying and they're hungry, and I have to go into a space where I'm going to have to negotiate and explain and, you know, have some sort of interaction, and I don't know how it's going to go, or I have to sit here on the path. And while I'm talking about nursing, I mean, this can be expanded to anything. I mean, I've also gone into the Moon Lodge where there was some creeper following me, and I just kind of sort of ducked in. You know, it's just a safe space in the fair for so many people. And, you know, what happens if I'm in the Moon Lodge and somebody comes in like me, where I'm non-binary, right? So am I allowed in there? Am I not? You know, what I'm coming in for, maybe I'm bleeding, because guess what? I bleed and it sucks. It sucks for everybody usually. So, you know, maybe I'm coming in for products. Maybe I'm coming in to nurse. Maybe I'm coming in to just relax. Maybe I want a tarot reading and I'm non-binary. And there's somebody in the Moon Lodge, maybe it's another, you know, community member, and they're wondering, do I belong here? You know, what do you do? What do you do as the person who's in the Moon Lodge and seeing this?
Anybody have any thoughts? Or possibly even run into this situation, because I know it has happened.
Because it's one thing, right, to say this is a space that's welcoming for all, and then there's like the moments where it's happening, where the rubber hits the road.
I wonder what I guess I have never been to the Moon Lodge. I guess, you know, bad bleeding person or whatever. But I wonder if I know I'm a part of the pagan community and earth-based spirituality locally, and have stopped attending certain events that do the whole women with a Y thing,
Yeah.
which I didn't realize was a women born women thing. To some people, I thought it was just kind of like trying to take the men out of a word or something. I don't know, like something less, a little bit exclusive. So my thought process would be, I wonder what the organizers of the Moon Lodge or the holders of the space, if they're cognizant of the spectrum of what is woman, or, you know, of course, generally they create the separatist things, you know, for people maybe that experience trauma or this and that, you know, some people have had experience in heavy abuse from men and just really want to have there's this whole philosophy on it. And, you know, my opinion is, you know, what it is in terms of being inclusive, but I don't, you know, I also haven't had that level of severe trauma that I can't see men, you know, so you know, you have to kind of be open to it all or whatever. But I mean, in some levels, right? It's tricky with that, but I would wonder what like the organizers and the space holders are, like in terms of the inclusivity, where that awareness is. I mean, I know you asked the question to like what an individual would do, but that would kind of be my first thought of being like, well, I would welcome you in, but if it isn't truly a welcoming space, is that harm or not? You know, in terms of like if it's somebody with more power than I am in that situation, would say something different than what I said, just trying to welcome someone in as a participant, you know?
Yeah, you know what? That's perfect. Actually, it is totally a great response, because that was one of the ones that we had too. You know, as an individual, you know, you don't even have to say anything about your personal stance. But the idea was like, I believe this is an all-inclusive space, but the tender is right over there, right? And refer to the tender. I know the Moon Lodge folks, you know, for many years, at least as of recent past, have been instructed specifically, particularly for those trans feminine folks who are coming in. But I also want to call out the fact that there are lots of trans masculine folks who look like me-ish, right? In terms of having a beard and presenting very masculine, but they bleed. They might have just had a baby or be pregnant, maybe chest feeding, right? All of these things could be true for someone who on the outside would like visually classify them as male, but is this space still inclusive for them too? Because guess what? They have the same concerns and the same issues around, oh, I'm bleeding, oh, I need products, oh, I need support, oh, I need a private place, oh, I need to take me and my child, right, into something that's a little bit less stimulating. Right? There's lots of reasons why people use the Moon Lodge. You know, and I think it is really important as we expand our concept of gender to look at some of these gendered spaces and see kind of like, how are we holding them? I know this has been an active conversation in the Moon Lodge for a long time. You know, so they're a little bit more practiced on like, actually, we do want to like sit in and hold this space for all individuals who are here for the types of services that we provide. And they provide, you know, these services, you know, in ways that I think it is pretty clear. And they've done great jobs of updating their signage on the outside of the Moon Lodge to be very specific in who all it is that they serve and their inclusivity. So there is some of that there, but some other ideas around what do you do, right? When you just like, you see something, you witness something happening in that space other than just referring to the tender. Would be like, you can be a buddy. Like if you've got somebody who maybe not fits the, what would be seen as the normal classification of attendee of the Moon Lodge, you know, you can be the buddy. You can walk in with them. You can actually be the buddy and walk in with them and go directly to the tender and be like, hey, I just want to check in with you and make sure that you're a safe person because we need to come in, right? The concern for a lot of trans and non-binary folks is that the space won't be held. Like the boundary won't be held. Like somebody will let some transphobic or anti-trans statement or sentiment be said and then go by uncontested, right? That's the trans person's fear. And in that case, then it becomes an unsafe environment for us. And we're not actually supported there, even if someone is still providing us with the services that we walked in the door with, because there's not being, you know, these boundaries held around who's safe to be in here, and the kind of interactions that are appropriate in this space, then it becomes an unsafe space for us where we may not even want to enter or may enter and then never come back. So there's consequences for not actually holding inclusivity in your spaces as well. But yeah, I mean, River, did you have any other thoughts on supportive strategies?
Yeah, I think, you know, when I think about any complicated experience we have in any walk of our life, it's always, and we're feeling unsure of like, what do we do or what's the thing to do in this moment? It's always super helpful to go back to our values, right? And when I think about the fair's values and probably the values of everybody who's listening, you know, it's very much about love. It's very much about support. It's very much about allowing and being open to another way of doing something that is more sustainable, that is more supportive, that is more expansive. And so when I think about any space in fair, you know, we're talking about Moon Lodge, but this could apply to just about any space that we think of. And somebody's having an experience and we're not quite sure what to do. I think it's really helpful to go back to these values and then make a decision from that place. What would be the most loving thing in that moment, and supportive and expansive and creative? And, you know, if somebody's walked in and they're bleeding and, you know, there's products there for them and now they have to go use them because guess what? There's not a bathroom in the Moon Lodge. Like, you know, that's a whole other step. And there's no protocol written for this, right? Like, regardless of your gender identity, you know, bleeding at fair, wow. Many of us have done it and it's a whole thing. So, you know, just being able to approach folks as like human to human, heart to heart, loving them. I think that is the biggest piece of being an ally at fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really true. And, you know, there's another space that we talked about, River, that kind of fell into this category that trans folks kind of enter into and are like, how do I navigate this space? And that's the Ritz. And I know that this isn't an issue for just trans people. All right. Me, this individual used to be over 300 pounds. And let me tell you, when I was in my biggest obese of states, I did not feel comfortable having nothing to do with my gender identity. I did not feel comfortable with my body to be in collective spaces. It didn't matter if it was a bathroom or a shower or a sauna, all of it wasn't comfortable. And then Years later, I transition and I find I have a similar issue, like the same brick wall I come up to. I'm like, I don't feel comfortable, but now it's not because I'm overweight. It's because I'm trans and my body is incongruent to what people assume looking at my face it's going to look like. And I don't know, as a transgender individual, if I'm safe there. One, I'm entering into a space that I'm naked. I am really vulnerable. Super vulnerable, the most vulnerable in my purview, because I am a trans individual who suffers from body dysphoria. I'm very hyper-focused on how my body does not look like people think it should look, including myself in a lot of ways. And so going into that environment, number one, even just getting through the door is really hard. But then you have to go, am I safe? What happens if someone says something? What happens if someone encroaches on my personal space bubble? Is it because they're, having malicious intent and they're coming at me? Or is it just because, maybe it's a fair moment, hippie unaware, just kind of thing that it's no big deal to them. But it is the world to me because I don't feel safe. I don't feel solid. So this isn't necessarily in whole, like the Ritz's fault, the fair's fault, you know what I mean? But this is a fact. This is a thing that happens. So, and I thought it would be a good thing for us to address, because again, this is one of those that it's not just about trans people. There's lots of reasons under the sun why someone may not feel comfortable being in a communal, naked environment. But this is also, the Ritz is just such an integral part of FAIR. So how do we have a both and? How do we talk about providing support for those who, for almost any reason, might not feel comfortable going into that space, but still be entertaining the idea? Because we also know that the FAIR has private, like single stall showers and things like that too. But there is something to be invited to go to the sauna to see a show, but then not feel comfortable going because you're like, am I gonna be the only one in shorts or the only one in a towel? How comfortable is that? Is that better or worse than just being naked and being the other? Because I'm still othered. So yeah, so curious, River, I know I've chatted a little bit about this, but I know you had some thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, and things that I would add before we extend out for some feedback is, there's multiple issues in the Ritz also, and I just want to name them. Like, it's very culturally appropriative. That might be a reason that it feels really uncomfortable to be in there. I just want to name that and not skip over it. And also, for those of us who spend 24 hours at the fair for days, that's the place where you get to go and take a long hot shower, where it's not like, 5 minutes, turn it off, suds it up. Like, you really get to luxuriate and feel clean. And so, yes, there's private showers, but as you're kind of pointing to, like, those are expensive. And they also are cutting you off from the communal experience. And so when I think about this particular example, I really can't think about it only as somebody who's coming in for a public experience. This is one of those spots at the fair where I'm like, fair family, we have some work. And so I really am curious for everyone else's thoughts. I have thoughts about ways that we could break down those privileges and barriers and, create safer spaces. But first, I want to hear what you think.
I mean, like we were talking about this yesterday a little bit, and for me, it makes me think of either one, distract them in some way. So like physically kind of put yourself in between whatever ogling or weirdness is happening, or, your self-created distraction in some way that just draws attention away. Or, it's hard to just walk up to somebody completely nude and say something, right? Like that's just like not an easy thing to do. And so I would like to think I would be bold enough to do that, and I'm not sure that that's the case. But I think just noticing what's going on, I like having an awareness of this, because I think this is something that, somebody's maybe never considered, especially someone who's not in any way kind of adjacent to queer communities. And having that aware, and just knowing that that's something you can look out for and be aware of, and like perhaps intercede in some way to stop, and that it's harming someone. I think, if more people were aware and that person being weird, then suddenly everyone else looked at them like they're the weirdo, because that's really who's being weird, right? I mean, they would feel that kind of like, what are you doing? And like, and that would be like an energy way. It's not even requiring words. So like collectively, refocus energy and really heal the person. And then, you know, send the energy to not do that to the other people. So I think like even just this conversation, and I know this will be played again elsewhere among the FAIR family, is really the awareness is going to really help folks know what to do in those situations, because I think a lot of it's just a complete lack of awareness that it's even happening.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I agree. Are there other ideas, thoughts?
Yeah. Well, my one thought around it is, we talked about it yesterday, kind of like Brooke said. I don't know if you're talking about what Aaron was speaking about, but he was a presenter yesterday, and he's a, you know, a 6 foot tall Black man. And like, there's an interesting thing, you know, like, I feel like Cass mentioned it. My brother experienced the same thing as after he transitioned. Now he's a white man all of a sudden, right? And like everybody sees him, assumes he's like a hetero white male that may be upper class, right? So all of a sudden there's this assumption of this totally different perspective. And I think in the Ritz, there's times when people scan the faces and don't even look at the genitals as a matter of respect thing. And so there are times in which you can almost be hidden and protected by that. And then of course, as you know, it can quickly be not the case too. But like with a Black person, you can't hide that. And there's a level of, you know, when you come into such a white naked space, I realized during that workshop yesterday, that is large part of the reason I haven't showered at Ritz for a while, because when people watch me comb out my fro and I'm like one of the only brown bitches in there, it's a different level of attention that like, if I'm feeling myself a lot, maybe I'm down with, but like, if I'm just trying to get clean, I'm probably not. And one thing I do remember, one of the last times I felt super comfortable and not even thinking about that, I think once I went when my daughter was young, and that helped because I just was in mom world. And then another time when I went with 2 of my partners, and we all just sang and beatboxed, and like we had this kind of like, you know, crew where we just felt protected because we were this bubble and we knew that we had each other's backs. And of course, that's not going to be a possibility for everyone. And save for like having a half of the Ritz that could be some sort of like safe space, queer, BIPOC, positive, body positive, I don't, you know, like some sort of awesome sign that would encompass it all in a safe space. I like, I hear what you're saying, River, like how do we create that or participate in that community, but feel safe and comfortable? And especially when it comes to like the majority of people murdered right now, of course, beyond like Black Lives Matter, Black people murdered by police, is brown trans women. You know, like they're top of the fucking list. And that trickles down, of course, to all of, you know, to other, you know, other partial aspects of those identities. Even if you're, you know, trans and not brown, or if you're a woman and not trans, whatever. So because we are talking about like safety issues where you will be put in a place where you feel a fear for your life when you're showering, whether or not you literally somebody's actually threatening your life, but that's where you go because of the truth of the experience. That's where I wonder, like, yeah, what can the Ritz do in order to create that safe space and just fully, I think of like the boner patrol, right? It's a thing where like the people that work there make sure if anybody's flicks a boner, then they get them the fuck out of there because they're all the creepos, you know? Like I remember when I was adolescent starting to get my titties and stuff, I definitely showered with a swimsuit because I was like, you know, from 11 to 14, like I, you know, until I got comfortable again at 15, 16 or whatever, right? And so I wonder if there's, you know, offsets of like boner patrol type of people that could be like, you know, advocacy control, or like, you know, some like you're talking about the bathroom fairies, like what can we set in place that we just know that there is that safety, like this person was weird, you need to go confront them, I don't want to, you know.
Yeah, I appreciate everything you just brought into this. It's, you know, I think about when we were breaking down these spaces, part of it is safety is a privilege, and that would be the spot to start, right? So how do we make safety accessible to everybody where you don't have to pay for it? And so if the Ritz, and you know, I see that there's a comment in the chat that says the Ritz is a service provider. So if that's true, and it is, then that's where we really start. You know, how are we providing this service in a way that's making all bodies safe and comfy, and you don't have to pay for that? Cass, do you have an idea?
Yes, I do. And actually, this isn't something that I thought about previously, kind cracks me up that I didn't. But Ayana, your comments actually brought it up for me. We're talking about potentially having a queer space within the sauna, which may or may not be doable with the current layout of the space. But that made me think of, well, why don't we have dedicated queer events or concerts or dedicated shower sauna times for the queer community at the Ritz? And by the way, that opens it up for what other communities need to have that sort of dedicated sort of space as well. But that might be a way that we can get around some of that and at least start addressing, like, because there's the real issues, and then there's all the perception problems from the community of feeling safe. So not only does, our service providers have to create a safe space, then the community has to, over a period of time of experiencing that space, then build that trust, right? Build that trust that the space is actually, for me in these cases, that I do trust the tenders to hold the space well and all these things. It's not a light switch, right? We're not going to be able to just say, ding, we did the thing and now everyone's welcome and it's going to go great. Yeah. As much as we would love for it to go that way, the reality is it very rarely does. These are baby steps, iterative things that we have to do and keep practicing again and again until we get it right. And part of that practicing is listening to the people who are saying that they're having, that they're being marginalized in whatever way, right, through the service that you're providing. You got to listen to them and listen to their ideas about how to solve the problem, because they're going to be coming at the problem, whatever the puzzle is that we're trying to solve, from an entirely different perspective than you. So of course they're going to come in with different ideas, and they need to, because they're the ones who are going to know best what they need. Mm-hmm. So in these cases, what we're saying is the queer community historically does, the trans, let's even make it specific of what we're talking about. The trans community historically has not been seen, has not been considered in any of the services or the way that we put our policies and procedures together. So we have a lot of work as a fair family to start addressing those things and building the community from the inside out, of creating this, what does a safe space look like for us at FAIR? What can we do that's different? Because FAIR is a special context and we get to do things a little bit differently here, right? And so having those maybe dedicated events is a great way to start that conversation. I think another way is what you were saying, like buddy it up. Right? Do you have a group of friends? Do you have a group of community members? Are you overhearing a conversation of some folks who are considering it, but are like hemming and hawing and be like, you know what? I just want to put it out there in a totally non-creepy way. If you need an ally to go there with you just to kind of help make sure that no one's creeping on you, I'm totally cool to be that person with you. Do you really want to go to that show at the Ritz, but I don't know. I will totally be your buddy and go with you and just be there so that you know that someone's got your back. Because a lot of the time that's all we need. Right? Because what I was talking about before, it's my perceived sense of safety, not necessarily anything that's actually happened yet in that scenario. And having even just one person sometimes that I believe is a strong person and who will have my back, right, is all I need to feel safe to go into that environment. And then finally have that communal experience, right? Because sometimes having communal experiences requires practice. Like we have to practice what it's like to have communal experiences and feel comfortable doing that. And having buddies can help us get to that place.
And just to say, I know the Ritz already has women-centered hours, times, events. So there's seeds there that we can help grow into something more inclusive. This isn't, a completely novel concept that they haven't figured out before. So I think that's perfect. And, the other thing that I wonder about is, in our previous conversation about the 2 sanctuary spaces, I just am hoping we could have something where, there are buddies, there's, I'll go with you folks from those spaces, right? Where someone could come into a sanctuary and say, I really want to go to the Ritz. I really want to take a shower and I need a buddy. And that somehow our spaces, our sanctuary spaces are like, okay, here's a safe person who wants to do that. And that would be beautiful.
Yeah, or have those spaces like dedicate, say at this date, at this time, we're all going together, right?
I was going to say like a group, that was my first experience there. And, I was an adult, I didn't grow up out there, and it was a really liberating, magical experience that I don't think I would have had I been alone or even with, one other person. So that's a way we as queer people can be allies to each other too. And like, it's like almost like bear bar takeover is what it reminds me of. It's like queer Ritz takeover. Like, and we get our like group together and we're just there and dancing and like having a magical time. I love that. That's a great idea.
I want to go to that party in the Ritz.
Yep.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a great place of advocacy too, because you're not Because the rest of the fair family public is still there. You're not removing yourself entirely from the community to have an experience. I think both things need to happen, let's be clear, because some people will never feel safe when the general public is there. And I think they still deserve to be able to have that experience of the communal experience at the Ritz. And I think there's a lot of value that could go towards that culture shift that we're all trying to move towards through exposure, right? Show up as a big party together, not a dedicated time, just show up. And then you're exposing all these people who may have never been exposed before that, yeah, we're gonna show up, we're gonna have fun, we're gonna be a great time, and it's actually not a big deal. And we might actually make the whole situation even more fun in general, because we're singing or dancing or doing whatever it is that we do. That is advocacy in and of itself too. I know we just have
a good segue, Cass. I know, as we're talking about this, where we really wanted to kind of land this discussion with is our yes, yes, yes culture at FAIR, and how we apply that to supporting our trans and gender fabulous people. And, and one of the values we hold is bringing that then back into this other reality. So I know, Cass, you had some ideas around that.
Yeah, so, and I think it's important to say that gender fabulous, because you do not have to be transgender to run into some of these issues at FAIR, because FAIR encourages everybody to dress up in whatever fashion, right, that they want to put forward. And a lot of times it's gender transgressive, these costumes. And so this applies to a lot of people, not just the trans community. But what do you do? So yes, yes, yes culture, people show up in a persona at FAIR. And without question, we're like, you're gonna go by this name? Great. You're gonna use these pronouns oftentimes? Great. You wanna be referred to in these ways? Great. What we're asking is to apply that same yes, yes, yes culture to trans people. Right? So no matter if you think that that person is just cross-dressing for the day or happens to be a transgender person, you treat them the same way. You accept their gender identity and the name that they want to go by within this context, because we do it for everyone else anyway. So there's no exception. We already know how to do this within the FAIR context, is my point.
Yeah, your name is Sparkle Pants Mermaid. Great. If I call you Jill, you're not going to answer. Wonderful. We know how to do this. We do this all the time.
We really do. And so FAIR is a special context where I think we actually have all these skills readily at hand. We just have to realize, like, we got to remove this veil. It's just not helping anyone thinking that these are separate things, that we don't know how to do it, that we don't already have these skills. We do. One easy thing that I would say is, if you happen to be a friend with a trans person and you just heard or overheard like a misgendering happen, someone used the wrong pronouns, there is a way that you can correct it without pointing your finger, without wagging your hand, without even turning your conversation and making eye contact. Just interject. He, she, they, every time that it's done wrong, right? And it's practice. Practice is the problem most of the time. It's not malintent. It's just people aren't practiced. So that little birdie in the back constantly saying the right one is a form of practice. They will start hearing that little birdie then when you're not around. And then that little birdie starts coming out of their mouth. And look at that, we've made a full circle. So that's a great way of allyship, of just correcting it without any shame, without changing the conversation or making it about you or the misgendering. Just correct it. And you can do that with yourself if you're the one who did it too, right? Don't say I'm sorry, don't dwell, don't stick around and feel all bad about the thing that you just did. Correct it, move on, right? Trust me, the trans person noticed, and if you correct it and move on, that's the best case scenario. If you sit and dwell on it, then we're having to take care of you. So I highly encourage, just correct it and move on. And if you overhear other people doing things in ways, like, again, check in with where your sense of allyship is in this yes, yes, yes culture. Can you show up? Can you interject? Can you just offer an alternative perspective, right? There are lots of ways where we can show up with that yes, yes, yes culture and, and embrace our fellow community members.
And I think it's important too to remember that, FAIR, many of us, okay, it's a sober event, but many people are in different realities for many different reasons all of the time. So I think that when we're interacting with one another and we're having these experiences, it's really important to bring that compassionate and that yes, yes, yes energy into allyship, into changing the dynamic of what you're seeing. We really don't actually know the other person's intent. Probably it's not bad, even though it's not helpful. So, again, kind of that bathroom fairy energy, right? We can come in there and be like, okay, you know what? Gender 101, and here's how bathrooms work. Or we can come in and be like, okay, circus director, and it has in the end the same effect, right? We want to bring more folks in and make it so that if they have more questions, if they want to explore later, that there feels like there's an opening, there's a door. And if we just throw up walls, I don't know how we change the culture.
Yep. And I know we're at time, so I think we're going to have to wrap it there. And I'll just say, again, we represent TransPonder, which is an organization who is all about advocating and educating on trans and gender diverse folks. We are at www.transponder.community. You can get a hold of us online and on social media. We are here for the community. If there are ways that we can help you grow and learn, please reach out.
And we love you. Happy fair.
Happy fair.
Thank you so much for being here. And a reminder, there's a tip jar down below. So if you would like to make a donation to TransPonder, completely tax deductible, please do so. They could really use the support. They do, like I said at the beginning, just amazing, incredible work in our community. In Oregon, I mean, they get national attention. It's kind of a model for how to do this sort of activism in the world. So thank you so much for making time and space for this today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brooks. We're glad we were invited.
Cool. So let's transition here. And we're going to take a little bit of a turn away from our scheduled content. And I'm going to try to see if I can make this work. Unfortunately, our next presenter has had a death in the family and will not be joining us today. And so we have this workshop from the Community Village, and it's Community Village's Day on the Peach stream today, on another stream. And so we thought this particular presentation was intended to be played on that stream, and I guess did not get to make it in. So I'm going to try to play it for us here on our stream, since we have this kind of hour-and-a-half gap that kind of seems to fit naturally. The people who put it together, it's equity and artwork, and we hear from a wide variety and point of view from our panel members from diverse background, from POC and queer folks, as well as straight, white and straight women and non-binary people. And, in a true bit of fair magic, this came into my email inbox not 15 minutes ago, right before this gap in our schedule was supposed to occur. We had kind of planned to play humanistic intervention training, which you could still hear tomorrow morning on this very stream. But Tade is fantastic in the village, so we really wanted to get this out there if it's possible. So I'm going to try that. Bear with me here.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anina Bennett, and I am on the board of directors for Siren Nation. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anina Bennett, and I am on the board of directors for Siren Nation. And just before we get started with the panel, I have a little bit of information about the Zoom session, and I wanted to let you know that Siren Nation is a nonprofit organization based in Portland, Oregon, and our mission is to promote, inspire, and empower women in the arts and the arts in general. And we present a variety of performance, exhibition, and educational opportunities, as well as opportunities for discussion with cultural leaders like the amazing panelists that we have here today. And I will now turn it over to our amazing moderator, Samantha Machinaro, to introduce the panel. And everybody, in the meantime, I'm also real curious to, if everybody who's watching, let us know where you're watching from, where you're tuning in from. You can put that in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, and put your questions in there at any time. Samantha, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the organizers, everybody involved with Siren Nation, for having me and our amazing panelists today.